Hi folks, I'm Chris Smith, Professor and Chair of Musicology here at Texas Tech University, and I'm the author and the lecturer for this class, Musics of the African Diaspora, a class which I originated here at Texas Tech, and which is one of my very favorite assignments to teach. Today's initial video lecture is to introduce you to the course, to the topics, to the format, to the assessment methods, to the delivery methods, and generally try to answer the preliminary questions you might have. This is one of my favorite teaching assignments, as I say, and I look forward to sharing all of these great musics with you. By way of introduction, I'll tell you a little bit about the way that we're going to deal with technical aspects of the class, and that would include the following. First off, it's going to be very important, obviously, in these times for you to be able to access a reliable internet connection via an effective internet-enabled device. It is possible to complete this class's requirements using either a tablet or a smartphone and over a cell signal, but it will be easier for you and less hassle if you are working with either a laptop or a desktop machine and with a reliable Wi-Fi connection. So do think about that, because it's going to be important that you be able to access both our learning management system and also our various online digital resources on a very regular basis. So the first premise is that you will have and will make use of access to the internet on a reliable schedule. Our learning management system here at Texas Tech University is the Blackboard system. Many of you will be familiar with it, some perhaps not. It's a rather clunky system, but it serves the purpose, and it is advantageous in that it's very familiar across our campus. If you're not familiar with Blackboard, please don't worry about it. We can get you jump started on it. If you are familiar with Blackboard, this will be a very brief introduction. And I'm actually going to hop over to Blackboard right now in my PowerPoint. So Blackboard, if you don't recall, you access Blackboard on the web by entering blackboard.ttu.edu. When you log in, you'll be prompted to supply your e-reader username and password. And then when you've done that, the particular list of courses which are available to you for which you're enrolled will come up as a result of that login. This is a slightly different visual connection here for me because I have so many courses. But what you'll be looking for is MUHL4300-5320, Musics of the African Diaspora. Again, what you see will be a little different than what I see because I have these editing privileges. If I toggle edit mode off, it looks just a bit different. And then you can see a menu over here. I'm actually going to toggle the editing mode back on. But there'll be small differences in what you see versus what I see, but essentially the interface will be the same. It's important for several reasons that you be able to access Blackboard. First off, and not least, because you're going to want to know about the syllabus. The syllabus is the contract, the formal contract between you and myself that arranges who is responsible for what sorts of obligations. You're going to want to read through that document. It's fairly lengthy, and so I'm not going to step through it right now. But it is the legal document that governs how we operate. It gives lots of information. It gives outcomes and assessments and learning goals. There are two places I'd like you to pay particular attention. One would have to do with ADA compliance. If you're an Americans with Disabilities Act person, please do communicate that to me. I would be very happy to work with you in every way that you need. Also, basic needs security. It's important to me that you feel safe and secure and that you have the food and housing and security that you need. I am an ally, and I'll also inform you that the very end of the syllabus includes this informed consent clause, which essentially says that if you continue to participate in the class, you are consenting to abide by the expectations of the class, just as I do myself. There's some other tools here on the Blackboard site that are going to be very useful and that you're going to access regularly. It won't take a lot of time, but we will use Blackboard email for all communication having to do with this class. That's a good way for me to keep all of your communications in one place and avoid missing anything. My expectation is that you will view Blackboard email at least once within 24 hours prior to a class meeting, and then again within 24 hours after a class meeting, because there will be communications and resources that are available to you and that you need to know about. Learning modules are divided by weeks, week 1, week 2, week 3, and the learning module for a given week will contain the slideshows for the PowerPoint lectures that have been delivered. Excuse me. The result is that you can use this material for review. We do expect you to attend class synchronously because there's lots of discussion and back and forth that goes on. But those week 1, week 2 learning modules are available to you, and they're a good resource. I think a lot of people find them to be. Assignments, we will use this primarily for uploads, and primarily those uploads will have to do with the various stages of the research project, about which I'll speak in just a second. And there are various other resources, but the principal ones are up here at the top. Mail, learning modules, the wiki, assignments, the syllabus. One other item, which I'll find for you in just a moment, and it's very, very important. It's a digital table of contents. Essentially what it does is it tells you what you need to read when, and it also tells you how to access that material. All of the materials with which you will work will be available to you via online resources. There is no textbook purchase required, but it does mean that you'll have to have accurate and effective and reliable access. So the textbook does not exist per se. We use everything, all of the material that we use is online material. There's the digital table of contents, and you can see that it gives a sequence of linked materials, of articles, of JSTOR PDFs, and also of additional materials, some of which I've authored myself. Playlists will typically be maintained on YouTube, as you can see over here in our slideshow. And those playlists are arranged by topic areas, sort of by learning modules, we could say. For example, here is the playlist for the Black Atlantic. This is the YouTube playlist for the Black Atlantic. And I will make those playlists available module by module, and they'll be in the follow-up emails, which I send after every class. I send a further 2 email after each meeting, in addition to uploading the slideshow. And of course, the reason that I do that is because I want us all to be very clear and in agreement about what we're doing and how we're doing it. I will occasionally make use of Spotify, as it says here in the slideshow, not too frequently, because 90% of the material that I want to use is not available on Spotify. YouTube is better. Occasionally, I will also upload materials from my own collection of digital materials, and they will be linked on this digital table of contents, as you can see. One other tool I want to mention here, and again, I'm not going to take a lot of time with it right now, is an online collaboration tool called Slack. And I will share that with you when we meet in class, but essentially it's a chat and threaded discussions tool. The nice thing about Slack is that it makes it possible for us to embed classwork and videos and commentary right within those discussions. So when we meet synchronously for the first time, I will open up Slack and show you how that works. Again, if you're not familiar with it, it's not a big deal. It's just a threaded discussion tool. It has the advantage of playing very nicely with your tablet or smartphone. Of course, that makes it much easier for you to participate in discussions and comments, which are an important part of your grade. Grading. I know that grading is often important to folks. It's very reasonable that it should be. Unlike the undergraduate classes I teach here at Texas Tech University, grading is not a product of many assessments. There are only a few assessments, therefore, as you imagine, each of those assessments carries more point values. There is a midterm and there is a final exam, and both of those exams are essay exams, in which approximately 1 week before the exam is due, via upload, I'll distribute a list of 8 topic questions which are asked to prepare, and then on the exam day, a selection, a subset of those essay questions will appear, and you will choose 2 or possibly 3 topics upon which to write your essays. We do this because that's analogous to what doctoral students have to do when they receive their comprehensive exams. It's a way for you to practice a testing skill as well as learning the material. So a midterm exam, a final essay exam, topics distributed in advance. And we'll talk about exam strategy and practice when we get close to those times. There is a research project assignment which everyone, both undergraduates and graduates, will complete. It's a formal conference presentation, a presentation on an interpretative thesis in the form of a conference paper, a 20-minute, say 10 or 11-page formal paper with handout, with a bibliography, with support materials, audio, video, images, etc., live demonstrations. And everyone does that, undergraduates and graduates both. Those will be completed and uploaded as YouTube videos, and then they will become part of the material that all other class members are responsible for. Graduate students, because you're graduate students and you have to have a separate assessment, you graduate students will be asked to also complete a formal research paper, which can be on exactly the same topic. But as you grad students know, a research presentation requires different language, approach, content, detail, etc., as opposed to a research paper. So the research paper is due the last day of classes. The research presentation is due about 2 weeks before the end of class, so that everyone else has the opportunity to do their studying on your research. We'll complete that research project, whether it's a presentation or a research paper or both by a multi-stage set of assignments. If you've been an undergraduate in my classes, you'll know that when we work on a research paper, we essentially do it in small chunks, about 2 weeks apart. We have a topic idea, and then we have a thesis statement, and then we have a preliminary bibliography, and then we have a background paper, et cetera, et cetera. And we do that so that at each stage of that process, I can be providing feedback to you about what's happening and how we're working. And then finally, as I mentioned, the Slack channel and discussions tool. That's an important way for me to monitor participation. We're not going to be in a room together, but I do expect you to attend the synchronous meetings, and I do expect you to participate in the Slack channel, because that discourse, that back and forth, is what makes it a seminar rather than merely a lecture in which you sit and I talk. Just to continue, as we said, attendance, participation, preparation. There will be readings. There are discussion questions that I have authored that will guide you to some of the crucial topics which I think are essential in a given reading. You're expected to read those discussion questions and then do the readings in advance of class, so that when we meet online during our synchronous meetings on Tuesday, Thursday, we have all of that material in common and people can engage in the discussion in an informed and contributing fashion. Some sources and approaches, how I think about teaching the musics of the African diaspora. I'm going to speak about diaspora in just a second. First off, we will deal with what we call the secondary scholarship, peer-reviewed scholarship, scholarship by people who are area experts in these music and music cultures, and we'll read what they have to say, and we'll look at the data they supply and also the modes of approach and analysis and discussion which they employ, because how scholars do things is also a very valuable topic of scholarship in addition to that which they report. So we will engage with the secondary scholarship in some detail. There will be a variety of source materials. Overwhelmingly, we're going to be going for primary source materials, whether those are old music manuscripts or historical descriptions of music and music behavior, or many different formats of audio or video or other formats of source materials as well. But that's sort of the corollary. Scholarship is the secondary sources. The source materials are the primary sources. We will look at different analytical perspectives, different ways of thinking about how the music is working and what the music is accomplishing. And overwhelmingly, our single biggest questions in the way that I think about teaching these musics is, how does the music work? And what do the people making it understand it to be doing? So we're interested in musical content, how the sounds are operating. But we're also interested in musical contexts, the times and places and people from which the music emerged. And those of you who have a familiarity with these disciplines will know that that means that we borrow techniques that we might think of as coming from historical musicology, and we also borrow techniques that we might think of as coming from ethnomusicology, and we meld them in this culture studies approach. Our interpretative goals. Ultimately, it's not so much my concern that you memorize a great deal of this music, although I love this music. I spent my life playing and studying it and admiring it. But rather that you understand that the people who are making these musics in all of these historical contexts and all of these cultural situations are doing so because they believe that the music is accomplishing things. There is intent behind these musics. There is artistry behind these musics. It is never random, and it is never merely instinctive. It is always intentional. And so we're seeking to understand those intentions. There are some themes to which I'm going to return repeatedly, things that I'd like you to keep in mind, even if I don't mention a particular theme or analytical idea in discussing a certain piece of music. I'll ask you to keep this in mind and say, oh yes, he did talk about that thematic thing that seems to be applicable here. I'm going to speak about linking themes in just a second. And here we are, linking themes. These are not a comprehensive list. These are not the only ways to think about this music, these musics, but there are ways that I find myself, after almost 50 years of studying these musics, I find myself returning to these themes. These themes seem to resonate to me. They help me understand how the music is working and what the people understand it to be accomplishing. We'll talk about methodologies, and I'm going to just run through a kind of a checklist, a bullet point list, which comes from a wonderful book of historiography by Matthew Downey and Kelly Long called Teaching for Historical Literacy. You are not expected to use all of these methodologies. I suspect that even if you haven't heard them described in the particular ways that this bullet point list does, they might resonate for you, you might think, oh yes, I have actually done work of this or that sort of methodological approach. But this is a way to kind of remind ourselves consciously and intentionally, ah yes, these are the tools we might think about employing in this historical study. For example, the issue of change and continuity, that which continues and that which changes. In other words, in a musical practice, or in a musical context, or in a musical community, what changed? What are the elements that are continuous or contiguous versus what changed and what elements changed? And very importantly, why did they change? Why did things change? Why did they stay the same? And how do the people making the music understand that balance between change and continuity? Significance, it's not a great word. That's the word that Downing and Long use. I might say impact or import or meaning or significance, maybe, for the people who are making this music, for the people for whom this music is meaningful. How important was it then at that time in that place for those people, and for what reasons? And how has that significance changed, altered, taken on, especially in the African diaspora, which is a story of departures and loss and rebuilding? How have these musics taken on additional layers of significance? That's really important. That's how we think about music's moving through history. Causation and agency, those are polysyllabic words, but the question that Downing and Long provide is a great prompt. Who or what made what happen? If the continuity continued, if the music remained the same, who or what made that happen? If the music or the beliefs or behavior around the music changed, who made that happen? If the music had lesser significance and took on greater significance, or vice versa, who made that happen? And so on and so forth. What caused these changes? What caused these retentions? Causation and agency. And agency is going to be a really important term for us, because in the story of the African diaspora, which is a story of people who were brought against their will out of their home place and to a different place by the forces of history, that is what diaspora means. Agency is very much a place of contestation. That is to say, slaves were denied agency. They didn't get to choose where they lived, or how they worked, or whether they were beaten, or whether they were worked to death, or whether they were allowed to sing in their original languages, or worship in their original traditions. They were denied agency. And even after the slave trade ended, even after 1865 in the United States, African American people continually were denied agency by Jim Crow laws, by poll taxes, by systemic prejudice and racist exploitation. So agency, how it is taken and how people struggle to take it back or to reclaim it. Agency is a really important word for us. It's going to inform a lot of our discussions. I like timelines and chronology. I like knowing the sequence in which things happen, because I think not only does it help me remember, oh yes, this must have happened, C must have happened after B, because D was after C and B could not follow C. That kind of sequential, linear thinking, it just helps me keep things straight. But also it helps us actually look back at causation and agency. Ah yes, there was this precipitating moment in 1863 and things changed, right? At that moment in the timeline. Or this different set of factors came together at this other moment in the timeline, and the significance of those factors caused change to occur. So timelines, chronology, knowing when things happen, takes us a big step toward knowing why things happened, and why is important. Perspective analysis, that's what Downey and Long call it. In musicology, sometimes we call it reception. What do people understand to be happening with the music? The makers have a set of understandings about why they're making the music that they're making. Do the people consuming the music, either at that moment or at a remove, do they share that understanding of what the music is doing? Or does it somehow take on different sorts of connotations when it is removed from its makers? Here's a hint. In the African American tradition, the music, once removed from its originating contexts, often took on different meanings. And that gets us toward this very powerful, very potent, very ubiquitous, very important concept, though it's not on our slideshow, of appropriation, of taking because of having greater social power. African musical expression has continually been appropriated. It has been taken from the people who made it and exploited by others because those others happen to have more social, financial, technological, or military power. So perspective analysis, I would call it reception. Evidence. What are the physical objects? What are the cognitive objects? What are the songs and tunes and dances and images and instruments and physical spaces which remain at the end of or later in historical chronology, which help us understand how those objects, how that material physical culture shaped or reflected the music making in the time that it was happening? How does the shape of the slave gallery in a Presbyterian meeting house in Kentucky in 1800 reflect a kind of integration that happened at sacred festivals? So physical objects, the physical evidence, that which remains. And how do we interpret that? How do we find meaning in that without distorting that meaning or imposing our own sense of meaning? Account. That's the Downing and long word. I might say critical writing. You all know that in college we talk about critical reading, critical thinking, critical speaking, and critical writing. I want to add critical listening because we are, after all, musicians. And how do we convey those narratives? How do we provide expository prose? How do we construct an interpretative argument? Your research project will be strongly oriented toward enhancing your skills in precisely that kind of expository interpretative writing or speaking. And then for the midterm exam and the final essay exam, you will likewise be asked to develop skills for expository writing in support of an interpretative thesis that answers the question you've been asked. So those are just some methodologies from this article, Teaching for Historical Literacy. I find these useful because really they help me remember, oh, don't forget, you haven't yet looked at the evidence, all the different kinds of evidence. What are all the different kinds of evidence? Have you looked at reception? Maybe you should build a timeline. Who made the changes happen? When did this thing take on other additional different layers of significance, and so on and so forth? It helps me organize my own historical thinking. Some themes. Moving toward the end of this lecture now, this is sort of a grand scheme. This is the opening wide shot before the credits begin in the film. A very important, very, very important term, dyad, that I'm going to use a lot. Some of you have heard me use it before. I'm going to use it a lot. It originates, this dyad of cultivated music versus vernacular music, originates in the writing of a musicologist, a specialist in American music, a man named H. Wiley Hitchcock, who's now deceased, sadly. And he was grappling with the fact that there are many different musical expressions in the history of American music, and some of them are what we would call so-called classical, literate, notated, concert art music. Yeah? But many, 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 many other kinds of musical expression in the American tradition are not notated, or not performed on the stage, or they are dance music or worship music, or patriotic music or military music, and they are not musics which are conventionally understood to be art objects. And so Wiley Hitchcock works with this idea that there's a contrast between that which is cultivated versus that which is vernacular. And that which is cultivated is that which is intended to be contemplated for its greatness. And that which is vernacular is that which is expected to do things. The original source of this dyad is actually in the study of language. The cultivated language in the Middle Ages was Latin. It was the language of reading and writing. It was the language of literacy and of the church. The vernacular languages were Old English and Middle French and Old High German. The languages that people spoke in the street and in the marketplace in order to get stuff done. Cultivated versus vernacular musics, and also ways of learning. Cultivated ways of learning have tended to emphasize formal study, musical literacy, formal study situations, a body of great works. Vernacular learning models are much more based around the idea of oral and oral learning. In the plumbing trades, I had a friend who used to work in the trades with, and he'd say, oh yeah, we have that. You read one, and then you see one, then you do one. You read about how to do something, then you watch somebody do it, then you do it yourself. I sometimes describe it as a model of demonstration, imitation, and critique. Someone shows you how to ride the horse, and then you imitate riding the horse, and you get bucked off. And the person says, okay, here's what you did wrong. riding the horse that got you bucked off. Let's try that again. Or how you shoot a jump shot, or knead bread, or play a musical instrument, or dance. Vernacular learning models, demonstration, imitation, and critique. Much the central learning method in a lot of the musics of the world, including the African diaspora traditions. I just spoke about this in terms of cultivated versus vernacular, contemplative music versus functional. Now, we have a class at Texas Tech University, a wonderful class called Music and the Contemplative Mind, which is about the ways in which music has played a role in people's spiritual awakening. I'm using the term a little more widely, a little more loosely, to mean music which is valued to the extent that it can be contemplated for its inherent greatness. This is a great work in the canon, the museum of musical objects. But the other side of that is music which is intended to accomplish business, to help people be born, help people die, help people mourn, help people celebrate, help people enter puberty, help a child be born, help a woman enter menopause. Functional musics, musics that get stuff done. Cultivated versus vernacular musics, contemplative versus contemplative versus functional models. Functional, music as tool, music to get stuff done, to get dance done, to get sadness done, to get marriage done, to get the Eucharist done. Function. I'm going to show just a couple of short excerpts of videos, and I'm going to ask you to start thinking about musical processes and what seems to you as a musician, to you as someone who is a formal student of music, how musical processes link between these several performances. So I'm suggesting, even though these are very different musics from the African diasporic tradition, there are certain procedures, certain priorities, certain ways of making the sounds that are shared. This is Cuban song.
Vele, 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 vele. Oh, mamá, abuela, el niño va a la escuela. Oh, mamá, abuela, el niño va a la escuela. Oh, mamá, abuela. Con los tambores de mi Cuba mi emoción, con los tambores de mi Cuba mi emoción. Cuando repica con maracas, con tercero, la rumba buena me llega al corazón. Cuando repica con maracas, con tercero, la rumba buena me llega al corazón.
I hate to cut this off because it's so wonderful, but it will be, the links to this will be in the comments to the YouTube video, and when the slideshows are uploaded as PDFs to our Blackboard learning modules, you can access them that way as well, and they'll be in the YouTube playlist. So here's our next exercise. Come back to that. This is I kind of cheated here. This is a hint transcription. This is not something that the musicians themselves use. This is something that I developed this way to think about how rhythm works in these kinds of this kind of Cuban song, Trinidad Cuban song. You could look at these, come back to these if you like. What seems to link these examples? This is music from just east of Havana in Cuba, Los Monaquitos de Matanza. It's a style of dance music called guaguancó. Again, what Again, I hate to cut it off, but that's what homework is for, right? And again, what links the previous music we just heard, what processes to this music we're about to hear right now. This is music that comes from Kenya, that comes from the continent. But I'm suggesting, at least by juxtaposition, that there's something that's linked here. This is a group from Kenya called Abana Banasari, or the Nursery Boys.
Umsiani tupe uno, umsiani tupe uno. right here we got Shem Tube of the famous band Abana Banasari. And it's a privilege. This is a legend, a living legend of Luya music. Definitely is a guy who's like done a lot of things out there in the West and basically locally here. He's one of the musicians that have popularized the Mutivo style. Bwana Tube, unaweza tuambia ulianza muziki lini?
Muziki huu nilianza mwaka 50.
What musical links between this piece and two previous pieces? That's a question whose answers might be informed by us thinking about the history that might connect these places and the various different directions in which that history might have operated. And again, this is music that comes from Central Africa, from the Congo, the country now called the Democratic Republic of the Congo. It was, for a period of time, the country was known as Zaire. This is a man called Franco, who was a guitarist, a band leader, and his group called TPOK Jazz. And the style is called Congolese soukous. To mute it, we'll go back and listen. The question at the bottom of the screen, if there are processual links, if these four performances of different music from different places recorded at different moments share musical processes, can we find historical explanations which might help us understand why those shared processes are there? Obviously, I think that those links are present, or I wouldn't be juxtaposing them. And that's how we think about content, the sounds, and context, the times and places and people from which the sounds emerged. And we use each to inform the other, each to inform the other. We talked briefly about the research project, and then we're almost done. We organize our topics by asking students to select a topic in advance. In other words, the very first stage of the process is you, as an individual student, will say to me, I'm interested, Dr. Smith, in working on X topic or Y topic or Z topic. And you and I will have a brief email conversation about that and sort of fine-tune that so we get you headed in a good direction that's feasible. And then we send you off and you start working on it. The way that we select the topics is that we are going to focus upon riverine or maritime cities. Now, what on earth do I mean by that? What I mean is cities where the land meets the water. Port cities, river ports, or saltwater ports. Because it was the connection of the Atlantic Ocean between three different continents that made the African diaspora happen. So in just a second, I'm going to jump out of PowerPoint and go to a Google map and show you what I mean. The reason, before I do that, the reason that we organize it this way is because between the year 1491 and probably about 1850, 55, maybe a little later, certainly all the way from Columbus's voyage to the American Civil War, the commonest form of transportation of people and of goods, whether they were agricultural goods like tobacco, cotton, rice, indigo, or sugar, or human goods, slaves themselves, was by sailing ships. And the Atlantic was important because it made it possible to ship humans from Africa and sugar from the Caribbean to North America, to where the sugar could be refined, and then those products, that tobacco, that cotton, that sugar, that rice, that indigo, could be shipped back to Europe and sold to make a profit, to make new fortunes for rich merchants who would then turn around and buy trade goods and have their captains sail back to West Africa and buy more slaves. That came to be called the Triangle Trade between West Africa, the Caribbean, North America, Europe, West Africa, the Caribbean, North Africa, Europe, and so forth. The cities in which those ships touched became places in which music was shared. African music becomes African American music in the Americas, when people who had been brought from all over West and Central Africa are juxtaposed on plantations and in cities, and in port cities especially, with people who came from elsewhere in the African diaspora. African American music happens because of these meetings in the Americas, especially in cities. So the way we're going to organize this is that you will make an A choice and a B choice of a particular city, or two cities, an A city and a B city, in which you think, I'd like to situate my research there. I'm just going to show you an example right now. The example is based on a Google map, and I'll go over to that now. So these are YouTube playlists, the Black Atlantic, pre-colonial West African empires, and so forth. And you can see that I've arranged the pieces that with which I want you to become familiar using these YouTube playlists. By the way, I do not expect that you will memorize all of these pieces. That's not the goal of this class. The goal of the class is not that you will memorize repertoire. The goal of the class is that you will become familiar with musical styles and begin to recognize those characteristics that link them. So here's the Google map. I'm going to maximize this so we can see it on the screen. And you can see there's a long list of cities here. Marrakesh, Accra in Ghana, Bamako in Mali, Freetown in Sierra Leone, Salvador, Rio de Janeiro, Port-au-Prince, Santo Domingue, Nassau, Bridgetown, Fort-de-France, Kingston, Havana, San Juan, New Orleans, St. Simons, Georgia, Charleston, Providence, Rhode Island, Long Island, New York, Halifax, Nova Scotia, London, Lisbon, Lagos, Abidjan, Kinshasa. And here are those cities on the Google map. And so once we have begun to discuss the research project, you will select one of those cities with a fallback, a B choice. You'll select one of those cities to be the site for your research. And then we will step through a series of research stages by which you will investigate music, specifically African diaspora music, in your city. There's lots of time for that. I personally think that this is a really fun way to do a project because you get to delve deeply into a place and the history of a place and the history of the people who moved through that place. And that is, I think, a good way to grasp how place shapes history and shapes music. Just one or two more slides. The term African diaspora, what I mean by that is the term diaspora comes actually from sociology. And for our purposes, diaspora means people, a large group of people who came from one place and went to another place involuntarily as a result of outside factors. So the original diaspora actually is the Sephardic diaspora out of Spain after 1492, when Jewish people were expelled from Iberia by Ferdinand and Isabella, the same people who commissioned Columbus to try to get to India by sailing west. When they ejected Jews and Muslims from Spain, Sephardic Jews settled other places around the Mediterranean in a Jewish diaspora. There was an Irish diaspora in the 1840s during the potato famines. There have been a variety of diasporas. There was an Armenian diaspora as a result of very vicious civil wars and genocidal actions. Diaspora means large groups of people who are summarily ejected from one place and go elsewhere, usually not voluntarily. In the case of persons of African ethnicity, they were brought from West and Central Africa to the New World as chattel slaves as a result of transnational global geopolitics and corporate thinking. They were brought to the New World to create fortunes for others. Of course, there was massive human suffering. It was these fortunes were created at great human cost. And right now, in 2020, we are dealing very directly with a once again long overdue reckoning with the degree to which wealth in our country and in many other colonial countries was built on the suffering of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So the music of the African diaspora is a remarkable, I believe, heroic response to dreadfully inhumane conditions imposed by the drive for profit. So in studying the music and dance of the African diaspora, we're going to also spend time talking about geopolitics and economics and the politics and economics of the slave trade and where the winds blew and which were the good harbors and who lived in which neighborhoods in those good harbors. And we're going to study those things together, and we're going to link those things together to try to vastly enhance our understanding of why things happen. Music always happens for reasons. Classical music as well as vernacular music happens because people believe that the music can accomplish things. And our job as scholars of the music of the African diaspora is to come to understand what it was that people understood themselves to be doing and what sounds resulted. So that's a bit of an introduction to the way that we'll work in this class. I hope that sounds appealing to you. I hope it's evident to you from the way I talk about it, even when I'm talking to the Zoom screen, that I love this music and I love this topic and I believe deeply, deeply, deeply in its value. It's been some of the most important components of my life have been the musics of the African diaspora, and I have been privileged both to study them, also to perform them, and now to teach them. So it's always a joy for me to teach this class. I will see you for our next meeting, which may be an advanced video, but more likely it will be a synchronous meeting on the opening day of the semester. I very much look forward to having you all in class and to what we discover together. Thanks. À la prochaine. See you the next time.